Good morning and welcome to all attendees to this webinar today on the subject of virtual wheeling from pilot to platform, including the risks, rewards, and realities in making virtual wheeling work for you, the customer. My name is Chris Yelland, and I'm the Managing Director at EE Business Intelligence, and I'll be your host at this webinar, signed in from Johannesburg. Welcome also to our presenters who will be introduced to you in due course. I'm going to share a link with you now in the Zoom chat facility where you can download the presenter biographies. So please keep an eye on the chat facility and you'll find the link. Welcome to you, the attendees, for your interest and participation today. This webinar is hosted by EE Business Intelligence, and I'd like to acknowledge and thank Eskom Distribution, Discovery Green, Mezzanine, Cresco, and the Solar Group for their valued support for this webinar and for the great work they do in this field. Some 2,100 delegates have registered to attend this webinar this morning to hear what the presenters have to say on the subject. This, of course, attests to the relevance of the subject matter being covered, as well as to the stature of the presenters. So may I thank them up front for their participation and for the time and effort that they've put in. Please do note that this webinar is being recorded, and links to view the webinar on demand and to download all the presentations will be shared and made available tomorrow morning to all those that register to attend, as well as publicly. Colleagues, this webinar follows an earlier webinar hosted by EE Business Intelligence on the 17th of August 2023, where Onika Antoine of Eskom Distribution introduced virtual wheeling as a concept. This was then followed by a webinar by EE Business Intelligence on the 12th of October 2023, where the concepts of conventional wheeling and virtual wheeling were covered again in more detail this time. And then on the 30th of January 2024, a further webinar hosted by EE Business Intelligence. At this webinar, Meridian Economics floated the concept of token wheeling as a solution to an identified drawback and risk of virtual wheeling, in that virtual wheeling would only be available to commercial and industrial customers supplied directly by Eskom or to customers supplied in municipal distribution networks by distributors that are in good standing with Eskom. This, of course, would exclude commercial and industrial customers embedded within municipalities that are in arrears with their payments of electricity to Eskom. And of course, this includes major metros such as the city of Johannesburg, the city of Tshwane or Pretoria, and others. The virtual wheeling platform was co-developed by Eskom and Vodacom subsidiary Mezzanine to address the complexities of delivering renewable energy to Vodacom's extensive network of over 15,000 low-voltage sites across 168 municipalities. Following successful piloting over the last year or so, Eskom recently announced virtual wheeling as an available product and a service offering to off-takers connected to either Eskom or municipal networks and supplied at either high voltage, medium voltage, or low voltage. And so it was felt that it would be useful to conduct a further webinar to explain exactly how virtual wheeling works, the practicalities of implementation, the limitations, and the risks involved. Now, the program for the day has been widely circulated, but a link to download the program will be shared now, again, with you on the Zoom chat facility. So keep an eye open on the chat facility for this. Today, we have 4 expert presenters who will each give 20-minute presentations, and in between, we'll have a 10-minute comfort break. Then, thereafter, Jonathan Skeen of the Solar Group will wrap up with some insights of his own as a major renewable energy developer and IPP generator. After this, we have set aside about 30 minutes for our presenters to answer just some of your questions in an open discussion and Q&A session. While the presentations are in progress, please do send your questions on the Zoom Q&A text facility. Our presenters will endeavor to answer as many of these as they can in text form, and the balance will be hopefully handled during the Q&A session. You may also put up your hands to ask questions verbally, which, if there's time permitting, we will tackle these questions too. So without further ado, I would now like to introduce to you our first presenter, and this is Mutenda Chipala, who's a Senior Manager of Strategy and Development at Eskom Distribution. Mutenda started work at Eskom in power systems and electricity pricing analysis, and advanced to manage electricity pricing, focusing on developing and implementing policies and tariffs. He is establishing the electricity trading function at Eskom, responsible for strategic design and execution of Eskom's electricity trading activities. This includes driving market participation, overseeing bilateral trading, optimizing trading portfolios, and ensuring regulatory compliance and alignment with national energy policies and broader market developments. His work involves close collaboration with regulatory bodies, independent power producers, and participants in regional electricity markets to foster efficient and sustainable trading operations. Really, it's a great privilege to have you here with us today, Mutenda, and I'd like to invite you to share your presentation and to deliver it to our audience. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, colleagues. My name is Mutenda Chipala. I'm in Eskom Distribution. I'm the Acting General Manager for Eskom Distribution, Energy Trader, which we call the ED Exchange. So, yeah, I think you know the background. We're all familiar with what wheeling is. But let me start by saying wheeling was introduced primarily to enable non-Eskom generators to enter into bilateral arrangements with loads. And wheeling is a mechanism to enable that bilateral arrangement. It enables it to make sure that the IPP, the non-Eskom generator that injects energy into the grid, gets paid, you know. And then it's important to note that in this wheeling arrangement, the entity that actually pays the generator is the load that is receiving the energy. This is a very important nuance, which I'll talk about further in the presentation. So there's limitations with the current traditional wheeling, and the limitations are primarily around data handling, you know, because we have to credit the bilateral arrangement through crediting the customer's account. And in Vodacom instances, it can be thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of accounts. So from a data handling point of view, then it becomes cumbersome and it becomes difficult. Hence, this traditional wheeling was limited to a one-on-one, a bilateral arrangement, and hence it was limited also to your high voltage, medium voltage networks, you know. But today, I think data handling is not a problem. We've got sophisticated tools. There's AI, etc. So to now extend this wheeling to thousands and thousands of accounts like Vodacom's accounts, we came up with virtual wheeling. It's still the same concept, a bilateral arrangement between a non-Eskom generator and a load. And then in this sense, it's thousands of cell phone towers. And those thousands and thousands of cell phone towers must effectively pay this bilateral arrangement. So what is different with the traditional wheeling is that instead of crediting now the thousands of cell phone tower accounts, we just create one account to credit the IPP for the wheeled energy. So this is elegant. It enables us to roll virtual wheeling to LV connections. It enables us to handle thousands and thousands of pods, which in this instance is it's Vodacom pods, and then there could be more iterations of this in the future. These iterations could include going and aggregating further down into the malls, etc., etc., etc. But I won't touch on that. Yeah. So basically, that is wheeling. How traditional wheeling is different to virtual wheeling, and then I think all of us here are interested about the money. How does the money, the credit look like? And then this is the formula for the credit. We effectively look at what the generator injected or what the load consumed. And then we take that volume, the lower of the two, and multiply it by the web's tariff, less losses, and then that's the credit. So this is, in our view, not complicated. It's simple. It now enables thousands and thousands of customers, thousands and thousands of cell phone towers to have access to wheeled energy. But there must be rules to govern these transactions. There must be rules to govern these transactions, and then we call these business rules. So what are these business rules? I think key is we use the time of use tariff, peak standard of peak, winter. If we for virtual wheeling, we only contract with the buyer. In this instance, it will be let's say an IPP that is injecting energy into the grid. If it's a multiple number of IPPs that are injecting energy into the grid, then we'll contract with the corporate entity that's responsible for that wheeling transaction. So that is I think important to note. It's one of our business rules, and I think one nuance that you might want to ask me is how do we deal with traders in this virtual wheeling setup? Currently, there's still some engagements with NERSA on how will the trading rules look like. So at this instance, we are not dealing with traders in this virtual wheeling setup at all. I think it's important for you to note that. Because you will be applying from tomorrow, and then we don't want to encourage you as a trader to come to us. Those issues are still being resolved with the NERSA. So the IPPs, a number of them inject energy into the grid, and then the question you might ask, what happens with the excess energy that the IPP has injected into the grid? Excess energy over and above the energy that is consumed by the off-taker, by the load. There are a number of options to you. One option would be to further wheel that excess energy to other entities. Another option would be to sell that excess energy to Eskom using the approved standard offer. And I think when I started with this presentation, I said it's important to note that the entity that is paying the generator in this instance is the load, So it is the cell phone towers that are paying the IPPs in this instance. And the mechanism that is used to pay the IPP is this virtual wheeling transaction. So the cell phone towers pay into the virtual wheeling transaction, the virtual transaction will pay the IPPs. So if the cell phone towers are not paying into the virtual transaction, then the virtual transaction won't have any money to give to the IPPs. Hence, we are saying wheeling and virtual wheeling or any kind of wheeling is only extended to entities that are not in debt, because if you are in debt, then the virtual wheeling transaction won't have any money in it for us to pay the wheeling generators. Yeah. So I think that's an important business rule to note. Yes, this can be extended to municipal networks, definitely, if they are not in debt. But there's a nuance as well. If there's a debt issue there on the municipal network side, we've got another option which is called a GX build option. We can unpack it further, but in summary, what the GX build option says, it says if the IPP is willing to pay the use of system charges on behalf of the load that is embedded in the municipal network, then the willing transaction can be implemented even in a debt situation. Obviously, there's agreements that must be signed. The only agreement here is the willing agreement. There's no updating of ESAs, etc. So those are the business high level business rules. So yeah, as we speak today, we do welcome applications if you want to use this virtual wheeling transaction. And then at the end of this presentation, there's a link that will point you to where all the documents are sitting, processes, etc., how to apply, etc. But in summary, this is how the process looks like. You first need to apply. There's an email on our website. It would look something like some province at eskom.co.za. Somebody at Eskom will receive that application of yours and process it. Apologies. So typically the information that we would want to know is the generator that is connected on the Eskom network, who is it willing to? So we would want to know all those cell phone towers, their GPS locations, the typical consumption that will be taken from those cell phone towers. There's a requirement for you to comply to metering standards. All that information is detailed on the website. And also on the website, there's details that explains once you have applied, we have checked all your meters, you've got all your metering certificates, what happens next? Typically, what would happen next is your generator would inject the energy into the grid and wheel it. And then you would ask us now, how do I claim for the wheeled credit? And then our response would be the generator would inject energy at day 0 or day 1. And then typically after about 45 days, we would 45 days is typically the time that it takes for a typical customer to pay their account. And at that date, we'll also issue out a qualifying list to you, to tell you that these cell phone towers of yours that are embedded in the Eskom network qualify to receive wheeled energy, and these cell phone towers of yours that are embedded in this particular municipal network don't qualify to receive wheeled energy because of nuances like that, etc. So typically that would be around day number 45. We'll give you that qualifying list, and then plus minus 2 days from day 45, you typically submit your claim, your data, your claim, and it will take us about plus minus 7 days to verify that your data is aligned to your consumption, number one, aligned to the time of use definitions, holidays, etc. Then we'll process the claim. Yeah. So if you go to our website, you'll see this image. You can click on different aspects of this image, and then it will give you all the data that you want. Okay, I think it's also important to talk a bit about the contracting terms. So uh, typically, uh, for a virtual wheeling arrangement, we would want to specify a contracting period. In summary, that's virtual wheeling. All the information is available on the Eskom website. The processes are also described on the Eskom website. How do you apply? How do you claim, etc. And then, yeah, we are open to receive your applications. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mutenda. And yeah, that's really interesting. The details of virtual wheeling, the business processes to be followed. It looks to me that this is an available product ready to go, you might say. And I'd like to just thank you very much for your presentation. And yeah, I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions relating to the fact that you're not ready to offer virtual wheeling to traders. But we have got some traders that are going to talk next. And hopefully they'll be able to clarify their position with regard to virtual wheeling. So it's really now a pleasure for me to introduce to you our second presenter. And if you can switch on your camera and mic, Andre Nepkian. And Andre is the CEO of Discovery Green. And Andre is an actuary and executive associate to the group chief executive at Discovery. He heads Discovery Green, which is a renewable energy platform that connects businesses across South Africa to affordable and renewable energy generated by utility-scale renewable power plants. Previously, as head of the Global Vitality Network, Andre led the central development of platform assets for the Global Vitality Network, including global partnerships, behavioral programs, brand initiatives, and vitality assets, data assets, and the extension of the Vitality shared value model to new markets and industries. Andre has an honors degree in business and actuarial sciences from the University of Cape Town. He's been heavily involved in establishing Discovery Green as a trader, a licensed trader. And we're looking forward to hearing what your views are, Andre, in respect of this development of virtual wheeling, its limitations and its benefits. So over to you.
Thank you. So, good morning, everyone. I will, Chris, if it's fine, I won't touch on that earlier point now raised, new point raised, and we'll, yeah, I don't think it's relevant right now. So let's actually get stuck into virtual wheeling and actually give some feedback on the way we see it playing out, in particular, the risks and opportunities associated with it. I think it's important for everyone to understand that, given that it is quite new, and you know, we've been quite close and involved in it for quite some time on it. So I mean, I'm here as Chris mentioned on behalf of Discovery Green, also you know, representing a new partnership between Discovery Green and Sasol called Ampli Energy, aimed specifically at bringing renewable energy to small medium enterprises, micro enterprises as well, and trying to come up with ways in which you can give more people access to renewable energy in South Africa. Maybe just as a start, to contextualize a little bit around our excitement around virtual wheeling, is the timing is good. The opportunity is massive. I think it goes without saying that everyone knows on this webinar that South Africa has some of the best renewable energy resources in the world. I won't include the stats there on the left-hand side, but really, you know, as a country, we have an opportunity to be globally competitive, to really, you know, lower the cost of energy and become a powerhouse in that area. Costs are also incredibly low compared to where they were before. I think that a lot of progress has been made on this, and there's also been a lot of supportive policy from government and various areas to support the transitioning towards a liberalized market. You can see all those ones there. And the one I think that we're talking about here today, that is very exciting, and I think opens a lot of opportunities for various parties, is of course virtual wheeling, and we're excited to see where this one goes. Maybe just right up front to say this is, I think, the first and probably most important, I think, thing that comes out of virtual wheeling is the growth in the wheeling market. I think if you look at sort of the split, the country's sort of net average demand of roughly 24, peaks and goes down different times of the day, 24 gigawatts on this, and the split between Eskom Direct and Municipal on this, where traditional wheeling was really focused on medium to high and intensive energy user group, and it's worked very, very well there. The virtual wheeling mechanism is available to that group as well, of course, but also allows it to extend into two new blocks really on this. So one is lower voltage Eskom Direct distribution, where there is a time of use structure in place, which I think is very exciting, because I do think that is a part of the market that is very excited to look at new wheeling solutions and take part in it, but aren't necessarily able to take part given the complexity of the usual PPA and long-term process associated with it. On the left-hand side, which I think is probably the biggest opportunity now, is that what virtual wheeling and the team Eskom really have unlocked here is ability to access the municipal segment on that, and look at various places within that. But with the important sort of caveat to say, and I think as is a sort of a fair filter around it, is to say, but you have to share in that credit risk, and you have to take part in that credit risk associated with it. If other contractual have agreements straight through to the end consumer through the municipality, through Eskom, and that it could be a complicated process. Virtual wheeling really simplifies that, but requires requires you to manage and take on, or at least consider the municipal credit risk that comes on it. So you'll see the yellow block there on the left doesn't cover the whole municipal area, and it's for obvious reasons. One is not everyone sort of included in this, and it is limited, as Matenda said earlier, to municipalities in good standing, and that is an important filter to approach here. So with a simple rule is, if the municipality does not pay Eskom, your credit would not be passed on through, and that I think is the only really fundamental difference or change that happens, with a lot of benefits on the other side in terms of administrative simplicity. So if you think about it on the block on the right, and I'll spend a little bit of time on this, is to say that the status quo is currently out. We call it traditional wheeling. It's the wheeling as we know it on the C&I space today. If you think about traditional wheeling and the way it happens there, there's the process is a rebate on the customer's the off-taker's bill. And then there's a payment to the IPP. So it's an offset mechanism, and that has been proven and has been working for quite some time now. And that is a mechanism that I think this audience really are familiar with, and how that actually works. When it comes now to directly to Eskom clients, on the other side, the consideration really around this in terms of risk basis has not changed considerably. It has changed, but it hasn't changed considerably. You still have the process risk because, on the one side, you have a credit from Eskom's side. On the right-hand side, you have a payment from Eskom. So it is a process change, but, not necessarily a risk change on that. And of course, on this side, you do still take customer credit risk, but in a slightly different sense, in the fact that it's not necessarily the customer defaulting, it's the customer being available to take the energy in the first place on that. So, if it is it narrows it down a little bit to specific sites as opposed to specific parts of businesses. So, for example, if you have a a group of businesses, and you have a parent company, providing surety on this. This is a little bit different in the fact that you are dependent on the individual sites still consuming electricity. So I'd say from a risk distribution point of view, if you're looking at virtual wheeling within the Eskom area, which I think is Eskom distribution area, which I think is easily accessible, and definitely from a virtual wheeling process point of view, the simplest way to do it. I do think that there is a slight increase in risk on the right-hand side as a result of virtual wheeling. But I do think, it is manageable. Term commitment and duration of the virtual wheeling contract is, of course, critical to determining the risk that you can work with on this side. But I don't see it as we don't see it as a fundamental, substantial increase in risk overall, and that can be managed on the other side. So I think very exciting to unlock Eskom distribution low energy users on that side. Where it does change, however, and I think this is where it gets a little bit more complex to manage, but of course still workable, is of course once you include municipal credit risk. And I think we'll all recognize that is a bit of a question mark at this point in time. And I also see from the questions in the chat that there's a lot of question marks around what is the definitions of that. I think if you add that in though, I do think that it represents a very different credit risk profile or risk profile on it. And from a risk point of view, at the face of it, without any mitigation structures or any innovations on the right-hand side, it does involve an increase in risk. And these blocks are definitely not to size, but we don't know exactly where that block in the middle is really gonna stand. And to give you a very simple sort of example or way that actually plays out, I think it's very much in the news. It's very topical around municipalities not paying Eskom. Is often numbers of nearly 100 billion rand being quoted as debt to it, and there's a rule on virtual wheeling, and it's a clear rule, and I think it's unless the client pays, it's not reasonable to expect Eskom to take on faulty municipalities, but the rule is that if the municipality is in debt to Eskom, there will be no wheeled refund really on that, which I think is a clear definition in terms of debt. The question is, of course, the information that goes around it. So I mean, here's just a little screenshot or an image of, as at December last year, what is the debt standing of the various municipalities, and you can see there is quite a long list of municipalities with substantial amounts of debt associated to it. So a big chunk excluded, of course, and not allowed to take part in this mechanism. But I think the question that you need to really answer, or need to be answering for virtual wheeling, and this is where more work is required, is to understand the credit risk of municipalities. Never been sort of considered or taken into account. In that list on the left-hand side, on that there are some big municipalities in there, and they are engaging, as far as we understand, various structures with Eskom to try and pay back their debt. A lot of them are on the Treasury debt program where they are repaying it. But the big question mark is not necessarily, could you wheel, or how do you wheel, or who's on this list on this, but it's the bottom there, where you have municipalities with small amounts of debt to Eskom who could move in and out of good standing. And that is, of course, the risk that you need to manage. Of course, on the other side, there are municipalities that are in good standing and have been for years of that. But it's the middle part that you need to manage to understand, listen, can I facilitate wheeling to those or through those municipalities? And we need to understand the credit risk. We need to understand, what the definition is of debt in good standing in order to model that. And of course, you need to understand the longitudinal movements between good standing, at risk, and in sort of default on these. So if I had to say for virtual wheeling, in terms of where the most opportunity lies in terms of enabling or scaling virtual wheeling is understanding this risk and finding ways to mitigate or manage it, finding creative ways to try and solve this. A little bit of thought here to this, and I also want to spend a little bit of time on this to give you thoughts on this. When it comes to municipalities on this, I think I've established in the previous slide that understanding of municipal credit risk is really the unlock here, is to really understand, where these munics are with Eskom and where they are trending. I think once you have a view of that and some view of that, the way to the next, I think, process that any trader or IPP or customer needs to solve really is to understand whether or not you will be absorbing that risk or transferring that risk. So I'll give you an example. The B on the right-hand side is transferring the risk to the client. I think that is how most people interpreted it. If you're looking to build any new generation, if that municipality moves in and out, it changes the business case completely. So, the current thinking around that space, in particular for transferring the risk to the off-taker, if the off-taker really wants to enter into wheeling on this, would be for them to continue to pay the municipal bill because there will be no rebate on that side, and then pay the IPP bill as well and receive a rebate through Eskom. So a little bit of I think it's a mechanism that limits the access to it, because I don't think there's a lot of off-takers that be willing to take that on, but at least, there is a mechanism to do it. There's cash flows considerations on that, but if you have the right off-taker on the other side, if you could find an off-taker that's willing to do that and put up the required guarantees, there is a view that could potentially be a workable solution for new project development. If the need for wheeling is that important that the client is willing to take the risk of having to potentially pay a considerable amount of energy on that. And I think there's a lot of innovation that can happen in that space around, should the municipality change from a good risk to a bad risk or in debt to Eskom. Is there ways in which you could manage that, transfer it to different off-takers, use different municipalities to transfer that? But in order to make it sort of bankable, we do think that security on that side is going to be the way to get projects done on that side. The alternative, which is sort of 2A, and to share with everyone here, is actually a model that we've been looking at quite a bit, is to actually say, listen, could we not unlock more generation if we actually absorb that risk and manage it as sort of a central entity? So yeah, you're basically saying that if your municipality does not pay Eskom, the payment obligation doesn't fall to the client as a client fault on that, but to the IPP or the trader, and that who's in a better place, I think, to redirect the energy to other municipalities who are in good standing or alternative mechanisms to try and evacuate that energy. Of course, the big thing, of course, is whether or not that risk is understood and managed and mitigated, and could be handled on that. Or if the IPP or trader puts up significant amounts of equity or security to enable new projects to be built on that. And then the layer 3, which I'll sort of end on here, Chris, is of course managing this risk. Now that there's a mechanism, I think we're in a great position to think about how you give more people access on this. I think it's very exciting that this is now out in the public. There's obviously a number of hurdles that still need to be overcome, but it gives an opportunity to say, listen, this is a new risk that's being introduced. How do we manage it? How do we turn it into enabling new and bankable projects being built on virtual wheeling, or a share between virtual and traditional, or fully eventually on virtual wheeling on that? And there's various ways in which risk can be managed on this. I mean, there's some obvious ones that I put here, being selective around the municipalities being used, being limited in the amount of exposure to virtual wheeling as a start until we see, where the municipalities trend. and how this process actually worked, as well as a number of other different techniques on this. So from our point of view, this hopefully gives everyone just a view of the new risks involved, the current thinking around how these could be either transferred or mitigated, and hopefully alludes to everyone the opportunity available now that you've unlocked a bigger share of the market who could access wheeling now through I think a very elegant and sophisticated mechanism. So thank you very much, Chris. Thanks everyone. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Andre, for a very frank covering of the subject and the risks involved, and efforts that are needed to manage and mitigate these risks. And there is in fact work taking place on the subject of token wheeling, which I hope we can discuss further, during the Q&A process, which is a mechanism to address this municipal risk and overcome the limitations as it stands at the moment, to enable virtual wheeling to customers in municipal networks that are not in good standing with Eskom. So I think the point you've made is that there are ways that need to be developed further, to deal with these matters. This is a start. It enables wheeling, of course, to Eskom customers, direct customers. That's not the problem. But the problem is those municipalities that are not in good standing with Eskom, and that includes some of the biggest municipalities in the country, which is problematic for sure. So having said this, we're now going to have a 10-minute comfort break. It's now 10:42. So shall we say that we'll be back here by 10:55? That's a little bit more than 10-minute comfort break, but we're making good time. So if I can call this comfort break now and ask you all to be back by 10:55. That's 5 minutes to 11. And we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is now 10:55, 5 to 11, and we're going to resume this webinar. I hope you've had a suitable comfort break and are back with us at the webinar. And it's now my pleasure to introduce to you our third presenter, who is Jacques de Vos. He's the CEO of Mezzanine, which is a Vodacom Group company. Jacques is the CEO and founder of Mezzanine, as I say now, a subsidiary of Vodacom Group. He leads this ever-growing organization in delivering digital transformation across the African continent, where more than 25 Mezzanine projects are currently active in 12 African countries. His vision for the company is to establish a platform business with unique insight and track record in the agricultural, healthcare, education, social services, and now also in the energy and electricity environments, thus assisting enterprises and individuals in benefiting from the digital dividend throughout Africa. Jacques has a Master of Science degree in Biomedical Engineering from Stellenbosch University, and it's a great pleasure now to hand over to you, Jacques, if you can switch on your microphone and deliver your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much for the introduction. It feels like yesterday that we had a session on virtual wheeling, but it's almost 2 years ago, if I'm correct. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and also noting Mutenda and Andre, your contribution. So I think Mutenda did provide an overview on the mechanism and the design and what he referred to as the business rules. Andre shared a bit of a forward-looking view with respect to the risk profile and some of the challenges. My contribution would be more of an empirical contribution with respect to the journey of the last 2 years and the lessons learned around validating the mechanism using the Vodacom or percentage of the Vodacom estate. So I'll cover 3 items, just the genesis, because I think appreciated the genesis does answer some of the questions on also how this has been designed, and the fact that it's a journey, it's evolving over time. Then secondly, the validation project, the current status and the outcome of the validation project. And key, the lessons learned. So what did we learn the last 2 years that would, I believe, be of value for parties considering using the mechanism? And then item 3 is double-clicking on the role of data. So the importance of having representative data from a metering point of view, from a reporting point of view, to allow and enable Eskom to refund the buyer. And then very important, the role of data in informing the purchase decision. Not all electrons are equal, not all Munichs are equal. We've heard around the Munich risk. So how do we use data and also the benefit of large language models and AI to inform a buyer decision? The genesis of wheeling, and again, the marriage, I'll refer to as a marriage, is really between, on the Vodacom side, the ambition of a net zero, running a net zero network by 2030. So this means powering all our data centers, facilities, base stations using green electrons. And then on the other end, the Eskom demand for private funded electrons. So Vodacom as on the left-hand side, just to give you a visual representation, and I think this mimics a lot of our listed companies servicing consumer needs, so food companies, retail, clothing, services, businesses. The green dots are base stations. So there's a 15,500 plus minus base stations across the country. Majority of our base stations are of course, in cities, metros. So the representation very much mimics population density in South Africa. Now, worth noting is that across the network, our energy demand, 80% is municipality. So we buy energy from Vodacom, buy energy from 168 municipalities each month. And 20% of our demand is buying directly from Eskom. So the challenge at the time, this was in 2022, towards the end of the year in November, having this net zero ambition. As you know, base stations got limited real estate for on-site generation, so the ability to generate sufficient, say, solar-powered electrons on-site is not an option. So we were really faced with, at this time, with traditional wheeling as a mechanism to wheel green electrons to base stations. That would only bring us to a 20% coverage. To move green electrons into Munichs, we had to find a new mechanism. And I'm not going to elaborate on some of the challenges associated with traditional wheeling and wheeling into Munichs as a credit mechanism, but this really created the demand for a new mechanism. This demand coincided, as I've mentioned earlier, with Eskom's venture into allowing for private generated electrons, private generation, encouraging and incentivizing private generation, and consequently the ability to, thanks to the efforts from Eskom and Mutenda, and I'll note some of the colleagues that contributed, we today have a mechanism to wheel electrons into Munichs. And this mechanism, as you've now heard, is referred to as a virtual wheeling mechanism. So which means as a buyer, and we're using Vodacom as an example, but you can put in any company, listed company or registered company into that definition. You can contract an IPP of your choice. I've noted for our profile, which is a 24-hour profile running the network, we need a bit of solar and we need wind for a night, powering a night traffic. So where's the best resources? I mean, Andre did note our endowment as a country, both solar and wind, contract or multiple IPPs, and then the ability to wheel to all our facilities and sites. So this was the genesis, and I want to acknowledge the virtual wheeling team at Eskom under the leadership of Mutenda. We're very happy that Mutenda, you've been able to join today. Aisha, Mani, I'm not going to go through the whole team, but the phases, and I'll keep it very high level, was initially just designing the policy and the mechanism, taking into consideration a lot of the both engineering but also financial constraints and challenges. Phase 1 was wheeling to Eskom connected sites or Eskom accounts. That was from November 23 to Feb 24. Phase 2 moved into wheeling into Munichs, and then ultimately phase 3 to run both Eskom and Munich monthly recons for April until October 2024. Now, during this process, we've learned lessons. We've went back to the mechanism and design of the mechanism in order to bring something to market that can be used by private buyers to wheel green electrons to their offtake sites. So we've been able to get our reporting from a metering aggregation of time of use data into the acceptable range of a 0.2% variance during October 2024. This is now across the Vodacom estate, and in November the mechanism was, or the validation implementation was signed off as successful. So on the status, and Chris, there was specifically a request with respect to the status of validation. The validation process has been concluded in November, and thanks to successful validation, the mechanism was now launched earlier this year, which I'm sure Mutenda did mention. So the part that I would like to focus on really is lessons learned. And again, I'm not going to go into the specifics. Mutenda did discuss the design. But what is important is that the data, both on the generation side, so the energy generated, the wheeled energy, plus then the consumption energy, the data is representative. So the assumption, and this model has been built on the fact that with smart metering capability, we can get real-time representative data from all points of consumption across a buyer estate. So the requirement is that the meters that we use for the purpose of reporting time of use data, that it's Eskom certified meters, and we can have a separate discussion on that. You need to have a storage capability. So if you're offline, the ability to store your time of use data, and of interest is a 30-minute reading. When you get back online, the ability to then upload the data for the purpose of calculating the reconciliation. So service levels with smart metering providers become a very important aspect to consider as a buyer. Not all metering providers are equal. So quality of metering data is super important for the purpose of participating in wheeling. So that's an investment with considering is auditing your existing estate, what percentage are metered, are the metering provider using certified equipment, sensors, and is it certified and audited on an annual basis. Then the second part, which Andre did touch on, is around eligibility. So we've got meter data. So this is your consumption across your estate. In the case of Vodacom, all the base stations. Only a percentage of the actual consumption are eligible for a refund. On Eskom side, your accounts need to be in good standing, and data need to be reported for a time of use period. Munichs, we've touched on the good standing risk. I'll elaborate on that a bit in the next slide. So only a percentage of our base stations, and the map here in the middle, green represent, and these are random just for the purpose of communicating the point, good standing Munichs, red are Munichs that's not in good standing, meaning only a percentage of our estate, of the Vodacom estate, for a given month will be eligible for claiming a refund. And this is dynamic. As Andre said, each month there's a unique configuration of Munichs that's in good standing and that's not in good standing. The good thing is that mechanism allows for the dynamic recovery, meaning it's not a bilateral recovery against a specific site. The recovery is against the aggregate. So you can each month aggregate demand in good standing Munichs into 6 time of use readings, local, non-local, and this is what you then report into Eskom for the refund. And this is why data then becomes so important and the role of data. So if we briefly look at the contracting ecosystem, and again, I'm not going to go into the legacy, the grey blocks, the ESA agreements and the connection agreements. For the purpose of virtual wheeling, there's no changes to these agreements. The blue agreements are what is new. Mutenda did cover on here in the middle. Let me just get my pen. Your Eskom virtual wheeling agreement. So buyer entering into a wheeling agreement with Eskom. Signing that agreement then gives the buyer a set of contractual obligations they need to honor on a monthly basis in order for Eskom to pay the refund. In order to honor the arrangement, I've mentioned the importance of a metering provider. So the buyer needs to appoint a certified and accredited and a trusted metering provider for metering your consumption. And then the buyer, in order to meet the data reporting requirements from Eskom, need to consider appointing a provider that can aggregate data from all the metering providers into a monthly report. So what Mezzanine is developed for Vodacom, for the purpose of enabling Vodacom to get their monthly refunds, is what we refer to as a virtual wheeling platform. This is a data platform that aggregates your generation data from multiple sites and your offtake data from multiple offtake sites into a new system of record. So a data model that's aligned with the Eskom definition on time of use, clean up the data, and then do a reconciliation report that's submitted to Eskom on a monthly basis. So the platform fulfilled 2 functions. The one is enabling the buyer to meet the Eskom virtual wheeling contractual obligations, and Mutenda did refer to them as business rules. And then the second one, which I think will mitigate some of the risks that Andre highlighted around in his presentation, data insights to inform the buyer decision. Not all electrons are equal, so the time of use definition of what's the profile that the buyer actually need for his demand, plus then not all Munichs are equal. If you look at a Vodacom offtake, majority of our energy demand are on the 8 metros. So I think between Eskom connected sites and metros, it's more than 50% of our demand. So when we look at Munich risk, not all Munichs are equal. For each buyer, a percentage of their demand will be linked to a specific Munich. So the 2 items, I'm going back to this enabling the buyer point and then data insight. So on enabling the buyer, a snapshot view on the left-hand side, and I'm summarizing what I've shared earlier. The amber blocks are dots, are the metered energy for Vodacom, all the base stations. Then that need to be overlaid with your Munich risk. And again, this is unique each month based on the standing of the Munich. That gives you the eligible energy on the right-hand side, illustrated in blue dots. The eligible energy is then what is submitted to Eskom for the purpose of calculating the wheeled energy refund. So recording and aggregating data in real time to ensure that we protect the integrity of the grid and that you never generate more than what you supply. So Eskom is not a battery, they can't store your energy. So on a monthly recon, your time of use consumption should be more than your generation. And this is leading to the second point. In a scenario where a trader is contracting Eskom, and I've noted Mutenda's point around the traders, which we can discuss, but in a many-to-many example, so a trader entering into a wheeling agreement with Eskom on behalf of a number of buyers, and then accessing electrons from a number of input providers or generators, noting each buyer's got a unique configuration of metering vendors. So what we've done in the last 2 years is develop the middleware that allow us to aggregate. So irrespective who's your metering provider and which OEM meters they use, again, noting that it's Eskom certified and on the Eskom metering list, we can aggregate data across the estate, multiple buyers through the virtual wheeling platform. We can overlay that with your generation profile. So in the picture on the bottom right, the different colors are different buyer profiles, noting the off-peak, peak, and standard time of use definition. The black line is the aggregate generation per time of use basis. So if you go back to what I said earlier, in an ideal world, your generation should never be more than your consumption. So on an off-peak definition, you'll note there's no overgeneration. On a peak definition, we've got 3 months where there's a bit of overgeneration. So January, October, November. On a standard tariff, September, October, November. So for these 6 sites, 3 solar, 3 wind, aggregated into one generation profile aggregated across all the buyer profiles. We are now in a position to start informing the trade to say, okay, what is the cost from an IPP point of view? What are we contracting as a buyer, and what is the refund from Eskom? So the virtual wheeling platform provide the ability to honor the contractual obligations as per the Eskom virtual wheeling agreement. But secondly, very important, and again, this is a lesson learned from the Vodacom implementation, supply chain put out a tender for what they believe they need. The market, the IPPs and the traders will provide feedback to say, no, Vodacom, what you're asking for is not what you actually need. And then sit down and have the conversation to say, if we look at the data, and let's use this now as an example of your profile of off-peak across the 12 calendar months, peak standard tariff, you need a very different mix from what you believe you need. Winter months, summer months. And the platform allow you to now, in an intelligent way, and this is where we bring the benefits, the recent benefits of large language models and training agents, the ability to, in real time, inform the demand-supply match. So for this demand profile, what is the supply profile, taking into account the Munich risk that we can use to claim against the generation. So I think data and will enable, in my view, plus then the principles of free economic, what does the free market do with the mechanism, will enable us as a collective to further evolve this mechanism into something that from a credit risk point of view is more palatable. So I think, Andre, I've noted your comments around risk, but I think a lot of those risks can effectively be managed and mitigated if you look at an aggregate view across the country. So a diversified portfolio from a location point of view, plus then diversified portfolio from a energy demand point of view. Overlay these 2 principles, you find a better match for what you need as a buyer. But the reality is where we are today, and it's a risk worth noting, for Vodacom, and I've noted our, I'll close out now, I'm done. Our estate, so you've got 15,000 base stations, overlay that with Munich standing, we can only claim for a percentage of our demand. So Vodacom will not be able to contract 100% of what they need to get to net zero through this mechanism. The virtual wheeling mechanism will, however, get us to a 50 or a 60 or 65%, which is a good start for now. And with that, Chris, just the last, any more questions or with respect to the platform, and please reach out to Marius. He said I can use his cell phone number, so please give him a call. We'll be happy to assist. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacques, for that really interesting update on where things stand at the moment. You know, how far you can get your commitments to net carbon zero achieved, the limitations that you experience. Obviously, the Munich's not in good standing represents a major stumbling block to achieving your overall objectives. And so I think further work has got to be done to look at mechanisms to overcome this current limitation. And we can talk about these further in the Q&A sessions. So thank you for a very clear and positive presentation on the journey that you've traveled and where things are at the moment, which, as Mutenda indicated, have resulted in a product that is now available to users with some limitations as detailed. So we're now going to move on to our last presenter for the day, and that is Shirley Salvaldi, who is now a specialist consultant at Cresco and was formerly, of course, at Eskom. Shirley has more than 44 years of experience in the electricity industry, retiring from Eskom in May 2024, where she was responsible for electricity pricing policies, tariff design, tariff plan submissions, and Eskom strategic pricing direction. She has represented Eskom and South Africa in various forums, conferences, public hearings, and in the media on tariff design, pricing strategies, dynamic pricing, and wheeling. And she was instrumental for the design of virtual wheeling as a concept and led the development of the NECOM net billing and wheeling framework submitted to NERSA. Shirley joined Cresco in June 2024 as a consultant advising clients on Eskom tariffs, on Eskom's retail tariff plan, the MYPD, and the South African wholesale electricity market. So it's wonderful to have you today here with us, Shirley, a person who's very knowledgeable, on virtual wheeling from its earliest conceptions to date, and now looking at things perhaps more from a customer perspective as she consults in her capacity at Cresco. So over to you, Shirley. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Good morning, Chris. Good morning, ladies and gents that have joined. So the purpose of this presentation is really to give a view, a Cresco view of how the market is evolving, and how virtual wheeling is actually going to fit into this evolving market. So I think everybody has spoken around the fact that we know that there's a traditional wheeling with a bilateral trade, typically catering for a generator to sell to an off-taker, or a trader selling to an off-taker. And this is now moving to a slightly more complex arrangement in terms of virtual wheeling. And I think the speakers before have tried to sort of explain how this would work. And it creates a little bit more flexibility in the process. But we also know that the market is evolving. The South African wholesale energy market is the intention is that this will happen in April 26. And the questions around how is virtual wheeling going to fit in when there is a market. We know that the Electricity Regulation Amendment Act has now laid this foundation for the market, and it's important to understand how all of the, even traditional wheeling and virtual wheeling, is going to sit within this market structure. So Cresco's been doing some work in the environment, mainly around traditional wheeling and the impacts of a number of different things that are changing in the industry, and how this is actually going to impact customers going forward. So we know the NYPD, the price increases, work is done on what does this mean under a wheeling scenario, the retail tariff plan, what further adjustments might happen, time of use periods changing, tariffs increasing, tariffs also being fully unbundled. And then what is the value of carbon? The value of carbon is actually not being factored into these transactions. It's not clear what's going to happen with the carbon tax within the energy tariff, renewable energy certificates, and the value of those. And then going forward into this wholesale electricity market, you're going to have balancing, day-ahead pricing, merit order dispatch, and potentially alternate pricing. So the big thing is the type of buyer aggregator is going to change. So we know that there's going to be projected day-ahead pricing from bilaterals to Eskom wholesale pricing versus Eskom wholesale pricing. Battery storage, the value of that is going to increase. There's also the potential to provide this as an ancillary service. And then what is going to happen with these flexibility of the PPAs that go from bilateral transactions to more aggregator type transactions. These will become more short-term when you're sitting in an aggregator/trader. So tariff unbundling, the changing wheeling rules, which I'm also going to touch on, the impact of carbon pricing, all of this is going to influence the value of renewable energy and the potential margins that aggregators might make. So what is happening in this space? We know that the market is liberalizing. I did mention the wholesale electricity market coming in 2026. The offers in the PPAs, we know that there's talk about more variable pricing, not just a single cents per kilowatt hour being sold, but rather by time of generation. So you're going to get greater value if you can produce in specific times. And this market is changing. Currently, you're sitting with this, if you're looking at the bilateral market, about 95% of it is dealing with one buyer or a primary buyer, and 5% at the moment is actually dealing with more multiple buyers and generators and off-takers. Going into the future, the bilateral trade, or the more traditional wheeling type approach, is going to reduce. This is the view of Cresco, and 60% is going to go into this aggregator/trader environment. And then going into the future, we see bilaterals actually reducing, still a market for the aggregators, and then also the trades that are going to be happening on through short-term PPAs and through the wholesale electricity market. And then full liberalization is you're going to have this multi-market model in place, and what is going to be the future then of these bilateral trades. So because it's going to be moving to more short-term PPAs, and this is where virtual wheeling definitely will be able to fit in, you're going to see lower gearing and higher equity IRRs being required because the risk profile is changing, and I think people have touched on the risk issues. There's going to be requirements for guarantee instruments to consider this risk. And then, as I mentioned, the restructuring of these bilateral and aggregator deals as the wholesale market evolves. So now we're going to look at the virtual wheeling advantages and risks. And I think people before me have sort of touched on this, but we know that it works as a concept of a refund, not a payment, based on this WEPS credit mechanism, which is aligned to distribution's wholesale avoided cost per time of use period. The opportunity is it allows for smaller size off-takers to participate. You can get greater aggregation over a large number of generators and off-takers, and this deals also with the potential municipal risk. And there's no contracting required with an off-taker by the utility. It's just through this virtual wheeling agreement. So how does this change from traditional wheeling? It's the trader, and I'm using the trader specifically here, or the corporate entity gets a wheeling credit and settles this credit between what they received and the payment that the off-taker must make through the PPA. It doesn't impact the bills of the off-taker or the payment of these accounts to Eskom or the municipalities. So it's not a credit mechanism like under traditional wheeling. The customer carries on paying their bill as per normal. But what happens then under the wholesale market? The advantage, of course, is that traders can allocate much closer to real time. They become balanced responsibility for their portfolio of generators and off-takers. And they can also then participate in the wholesale market by selling any excess energy that there may be. So what are the key issues on virtual wheeling? It's not a silver bullet. It doesn't resolve the Munich debt issue, and I think this has been said over and over again. It is very heavily reliant on data platforms and integration with the Eskom systems, and I think Mezzanine did share this as this is a big issue. Well, not an issue, but it is something that you need to take into account. There needs to be real-time management of consumption and generation to allow for this aggregation and also to address any off-taker default or municipal default. And the counterparty is going to be responsible for the off-taker metering if it's within a municipality. Some of the other key questions raised. Will Eskom allow contracting with the trader as the counterparty? Eskom says they won't while they're having these discussions with NERSA. I do believe that there's such a great benefit to allow traders to participate or to use this as a product. And I'm not clear how it would work if you're not dealing with traders or corporate entities such as Vodacom. There is a cash flow risk for the counterparty because this refund happens more than 80 days after generation. Mutenda did say 45 days. We've sort of tried to map it out, and we're seeing it's probably closer to 80 days. How is this refund mechanism going to work under the wholesale market? And I'm going to touch on that just in a few slides. How does virtual wheeling fit into a grid capacity allocation rule? Because you are now under generators now selling to a party under a virtual wheeling agreement, and the off-takers can be quite fluid. PPA structuring to accommodate virtual wheeling and the risks have to be understood. And will developers actually be able to get to financial close selling through a virtual wheeling agreement? Or does the trader or the corporate end up providing the guarantees and covering all the risks? The off-takers have to be on time of use tariffs. So this does mean for a lot of the low voltage connected customers conversions to time of use tariffs if they're not on it already. And what guarantees are they being given that virtual wheeling will continue to be a product that Eskom offers, especially if PPAs have all been concluded on this basis? So I'm going to just touch a little bit on a few other aspects that have potentially can impact or link with virtual wheeling. So I'm not going to go into detail in this slide, as Chris will be sharing these, but these rules provide standardization, non-discriminatory access, and don't exclude virtual wheeling. Virtual wheeling is really an accounting mechanism on how you deal with this. So these rules don't touch on that as a mechanism. But the important thing is NERSA said wheeling is going to be allowed actually even for low voltage connected generators. I'm not sure how that will work unless you sit in an aggregator environment, aggregator slash trader environment. The other aspects of the rules are that you can't have wheeling tariffs that are different from tariffs that are supplying customers that the utility supplies energy to. There are quite a lot of obligations that are placed on the network service provider to facilitate wheeling and provide remedies for constraints. Timing is not clear when these processes will be in place, and we also know that for a lot of municipalities don't have wheeling policies or not on the same page. NERSA does state that where the buyer is a trader or a corporate entity and is not the off-taker, the network service provider may contract with the trader or corporate entity. So there's acknowledgement even in these NERSA rules that the acknowledgement of contracting with traders. I'm going to go on to the next slide. Then there's curtailment rules or curtailment regime and virtual wheeling, and let's just touch on how that's actually going to work. So Eskom made a submission to support the application to recover curtailment costs as an ancillary service. And in the Eskom submission, even though we understand the NERSA decision was around the approval of it being a cost that can be recovered through tariffs, the Eskom supporting submission said that if the generator is curtailed, there's no cash payment to the generator for the curtailed energy. This is under private bilateral contracts. The off-taker is going to be allocated the deemed energy as if the generator had produced it. So it's not a cash payment to the generator. It's if the energy was going to be wheeled, and it was curtailed, that energy that was going to be wheeled gets given to the off-taker. And then there's a process within the NTCSA. They will allocate this to Eskom distribution, and then Eskom distribution is going to then allocate it to the off-taker or the virtual wheeling counterparty if that counterparty is a trader, and then the NTCSA will settle with Eskom distribution through the ancillary service budget. So So what are the implications for the generator? The Eskom contracts to actually deal with how curtailment is going to work in terms of how this is going to be proven that the generator could have produced. There's going to have to be a process where the NTCSA is going to approve the steamed energy, and then the generator will bill under the PPA the trader as if that the steamed energy was actually produced, and the trader will pay the generator for the steamed energy. So what are the implications for the trader? Under virtual wheeling, the kilowatt hours per time of use need to be refunded to the trader as if the generator produced. The trader will receive the deemed energy and a credit for this energy. And then the trader allocates the energy to the off-taker and settles between the credits. So the high-level process, there's still a number of detailed workings. This is not coming from Eskom. This is just sort of trying to sort of set the scene that there's a high-level process that needs to be established. The generator gets curtailed by the system operator. There needs to be proof of production. Somebody needs to approve this deemed energy. Is it the system operator? Not quite clear. Then it gets allocated to the trader through either the market operations or just Eskom DX, and then the trader then allocates it to the load. So how will virtual wheeling work under the wholesale market? So the wholesale market is going to comprise a number of different participants. You're going to have private consumers, you're going to have unregulated retailers or / traders, parties that buy and sell energy under their licenses, but they are not necessarily regulated licensees, such as Eskom distribution or municipal distributors. And then this market will actually comprise a number of different aspects: physical day-ahead, physical intraday markets, physical day-ahead markets, and then financial markets. And the financial market side of it is missing a little. So parties under virtual wheeling will be able to potentially participate in these markets as well, to even aggregators that might have a virtual wheeling portfolio could have excess energy that they could actually participate in this market. So some of the key issues around the wholesale market is how do private parties actually participate? Going into the future, the WEP's credit mechanism may change. Are municipalities going to trade on the day-ahead market with their legislative challenges like the MFMA? And there are going to be key changes to PPAs and market participants once the market is fully operational. And then there's going to be future tariff structure changes and excessive fixed costs, or the weighting between fixed and variable, where fixed costs or fixed charges are going to increase. And then this establishment for the financial energy markets, such as contracts for differences and hedges. So this is my last slide, just touching then on with virtual wheeling. As we've mentioned, there's a settlement by Eskom to the trader for the wheeled energy, and then this gets settled between the two parties. But when the market gets introduced, the concept is that the way that the WEP's credit mechanism works is going to have to change. That instead of this credit mechanism on which a refund is based, or the Eskom Gen wheeling tariff, the tariff is going to have to be unbundled and restructured into energy only and use of system. How this is going to work with virtual wheeling, I think, is still going to be established, because the credit mechanism is going to have to be evolved, because as I mentioned earlier, this credit mechanism is based on Eskom distributions avoided cost, i.e. what they would have paid to the NTCSA. But once the market is fully established, that payment or that and the vesting contracts or the transitional period where Eskom distribution or municipality will be buying on the market, and the market prices will change every day. It's still envisaged that there's going to be a wholesale tariff to set as a benchmark, unless so if there's going to have to be decisions on how this WEPS credit mechanism is actually going to work, how the refund is going to work under virtual wheeling. Again, the market says that only one party is a balance responsible party. So you can't have, for example, Eskom distribution and a generator both being balance responsible, or where there's a portfolio of generation and consumption that different parties will be responsible. So this is where the role of traders, and under virtual wheeling it becomes a lot more becomes more accurate in order to provide day-ahead schedules and to become balance responsibility, because you're dealing with a much larger portfolio of generation and consumption. The one important point is that when the market is introduced, the draft market code actually said that trades will be settled on schedule and not on actual delivered, and the difference is dealt with through balancing. So if under virtual wheeling a trader says this is going to be my portfolio, this is done day ahead, those are the values on which the trades will be settled, and the difference, if there are differences, the trader or corporate entity will become balance responsible for that difference, either get paid or pay. And we also know that going into the future, power purchase agreements could evolve into contract for differences, and the question is then how would virtual wheeling work in this environment?
Thank you very much, Shirley, for those insights. Your knowledge on this subject is deep. It's a complex subject. I'm pleased we're going to be sharing your presentation so that participants in this webinar can really study it carefully. But I think you've explained it in a way that the presentation, upon reading now, will make a lot more sense. So thank you very much for all those clarifications and for your experience that you've brought to the table today. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now my pleasure to introduce to you Jonathan Skeen, who's the head of the commercial division at Solar Group. And he's going to provide a kind of a wrap-up of what he's heard today. He's got some slides that he'll present. He's been working on these slides real time as these discussions have evolved online today. I just want to tell you, Jonathan has 17 years experience in clean energy projects, energy policy, engineering and management, and he's played a key role in delivering private wheeling capacity, including all three of the current operational utility scale wheeling projects in South Africa. As the MD of Solar Commercial, he chairs the executive and risk committees and is responsible for business development, marketing, and corporate finance functions. Before joining Solar, Jonathan worked on several large-scale industrial projects in the USA, Italy, and South Africa, and as a clean energy policy consultant under the UN Environmental Programme, or UNEP. Jonathan qualified as a mechanical engineer at UCT, and he holds an MSc with distinction in technology policy and management from Edinburgh University. So thanks for joining us, Jonathan. We're looking forward to your wrap-up and also your comments. As a generator, as an IPP, as a developer of these large-scale, utility-scale generation facilities, which form part of wheeling and virtual wheeling. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Chris. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to speak to what is really a fascinating new development in the energy market in South Africa. It's been such an interesting session because we've had such great angles from different entities that are playing a big role in the evolution of the space. And I think probably my job is probably quite difficult because there's so much information and great levels of complexity that have been brought through here, but I'll do my best to cover that out. I think just to kind of give our perspective, which is and maybe just very briefly explain who we are. I mean, so Solar Group is a renewable energy company, an integrated renewable energy solution provider. We've been around since about 2008. And our view on virtual wheeling comes from a very specific angle, and it's really around the focus on actually implementing and constructing and owning and operating renewable energy generation plants. And through that sort of DNA and our vertically integrated structure, we are really involved in across the chain of actually bringing electricity to the network. So actually physically delivering that energy to the network and making sure that those electrons arrive. And that the end users actually get the benefit of that. So that really does inform a lot of our journey through the wheeling process. And, we've been very, very intimately involved in the development of wheeling in South Africa. First, obviously, in terms of the traditional wheeling process, where we've actually got three large-scale wheeling projects delivering energy across the country to private companies. And we've also delivered energy really to, 70 different companies across South Africa and in all 9 provinces of the country. So we've kind of looked across from the buyer side all the way to the origination of these projects. And virtual wheeling is quite fascinating to us, and it's a great opportunity for us. So we have our own sort of unique views on the opportunities and also some of the risks and potentially the challenges. I think to maybe speak to the journey a little bit in terms of what we've done in terms of bringing energy to the market, but also actually speaks to really how the South African market has evolved to the point where we are having this discussion. Where, when the REAP program started in 2008, there were really very few options for businesses to buy clean energy at all. There was that large-scale program where private companies could tender on a competitive basis to sell energy to Eskom and to the via Department of Energy program. But really, the first green shoots of actually providing clean energy to businesses at any sort of real scale started in around 2013, when some of the first large rooftop systems came online. Those were behind the meter, so there was no wheeling. And in terms of our journey, we sort of started out developing projects on that basis, and really the buyers would own those projects. So they would actually own the infrastructure and put it on their own properties. And it was around the late 2019, 2017, where we actually started to sell power, but again, often typically behind the meter. So we would own the asset that generated at the property and sold that power. In around 2021, we switched on the first large-scale solar wheeling project that was selling across the network, and that was for Amazon. And since then, we've brought large assets which we had been developing, many of which we had actually been developing under the auspices of the REAP program, and we've repurposed those to sell power to private users. I think what's really interesting about virtual wheeling, and it is how these projects are now moving from a single buyer, single seller kind of structure to generation being sold to multiple buyers, and the generator itself being kind of a little bit removed from what the end user actually sees, and they're buying power more in a way that you would expect to buy power from your utility itself. So a tariff structure and a contract that doesn't really speak in great detail to the technology that sits behind that. We are busy finalizing construction now on a project that starts to actually do that. So it's reaching operations in the next few months, and it's selling power to a wide range of businesses on that may be drawing as little as 1 megawatt and up to 75 megawatts, and on contract lengths that range from 12 months to 20 years. So that's been a huge change actually in choice for the market. And virtual wheeling is obviously opening that up to an even wider range of businesses in South Africa. I'll just come to just talk through a bit of what we've heard today, and again just some really interesting and diverse inputs from across the different speakers. And I think Mutenda obviously spoke really about the nuts and bolts of this virtual wheeling platform. I think he raised a really interesting point, which is the data complexity of the complexity of trying to achieve this through a traditional wheeling process, where the management of data is quite difficult. So I think virtual wheeling moves to solve some of that problem, or at least creates the space where a lot of different entities can start to solve that data program. And Mezzanine obviously presented that platform that manages all of that data complexity. The good standing requirements were highlighted by Eskom. This has been a big point touched on by Eskom, Discovery, and Mezzanine, and also Shirley also raised this. I think that the risks associated with virtual wheeling are an area that still needs potentially some work. It's not entirely clear how these will be managed. There's different routes to manage that risk. Certainly from the IPP perspective, the generator itself is ultimately at the end of the whole process limited by what funding we can raise, and our funders will have certainly limits in terms of how much risk they will be willing to absorb. And I'll touch on that a little bit in terms of one of the next slides. I think that Eskom obviously pointed out the criteria. There's actually a very nice, Eskom have set out a very nice set of information on the virtual wheeling website, which I think, so I won't go into all of the detail there, but Mutenda obviously gave the whistle-stop tour of that, but there's a lot of good information there. I think one point which is quite interesting, and there was a question earlier around saying that this is very complicated. I think what's probably an interesting point to make is that the virtual wheeling platform, as Mutenda has also presented it, is a lot simpler actually from our perspective, obviously being experts in the sector than in some ways than the traditional wheeling side. But for the end users, a lot of that complexity is actually going to be dealt with between Eskom and the energy company and the energy supplier. So end users potentially won't see a lot of that complexity. So I think it's probably an important point to emphasize here that end users may just end up signing one contract with the energy supplier, and they won't necessarily be exposed to the actual implementation and management of the virtual wheeling structure. So Andre obviously gave us some great insights into Discovery's view, and bringing their sort of their history and DNA and obviously data and analytics of risk across large portfolios, which is obviously something that they're highly specialized in. The point that Andre raised around how this really opens up a much larger section of the market, which certainly we see that as well. Previously we could only wheel to time of use users on Eskom on medium voltage, so not on low voltage. So this is a big step forward in terms of opening up choice and the opportunity to purchase green energy, lower cost energy on a much larger platform. And Andre, I obviously unpacked the question of risk again and which direction this goes in. So is it pushed onto the IPP or the trader? Is it pushed onto the buyer? And I thought a really interesting point there was that individual buyer risk is potentially something that can be managed a little bit more easily, because you potentially have a large number of buyers. If one buyer falls over, you can potentially shift power to other buyers, but that the municipal risk is more of a point failure in a sense. If you have an entire municipality that has a portfolio of your buyers attached to it, that is moving in and out of good standing, that becomes a difficult risk to manage, and the impact is less granular and can actually be quite material on your portfolio of power. You may not be able to shift that amount of power that easily if one of the municipalities suddenly moves out of the good graces of Eskom. So I think really an interesting view there. I think definitely what's come through in a lot of these discussions is that the virtual wheeling pointing towards shorter contracts, and I'll save a little bit of commentary on that. I think it's a very important point. To Jacques' presentation from Mezzanine, I think it's just fascinating to see the journey that they've gone through to bring their platform to fruition. There's obviously a lot of complexity on the data side. The metering is an interesting point, I think, and the quality of the metering and the reliability of the metering, because that actually has implications in terms of the ability to reclaim credits, and that's a risk that needs to be very closely managed. So the data management and the metering is going to be a huge area of work. It's also going to be an area potentially for the growth of these industries, the enhancement of these services, and competition amongst the metering companies as well, which is great generally for the economy. I think the other key point there was made by Jacques was enabling the buyer. And certainly what we've seen, as a company, again, focusing on delivering the electron and making sure that our buyers get their power, is that these types of platforms are creating a lot of confusion in the market. And that's a natural process of where it's a new structure, but there's certainly all kinds of ways that you can design products that can be built on the back of the virtual wheeling network, but enabling the buyer to understand what they're buying, to understand and also to be able to get them to make the right decision, to make a decision that's going to save them money and reduce their risk, is really, really important. And it's something for buyers to consider, because we are in a process now where there are many different products being offered in the market. Some are more real than others. And that's something very, very important for buyers. And when I say buyers, I mean the end users to take into account. Moving quickly down to Cresco, and Shirley, obviously, I mean, and just a fascinating view there, which really draws back the curtain and shows actually that we're really in a process of quite significant change at the moment. There is a broader market liberalization process that's underway. There are several processes that have a huge impact on how we will buy energy in the future, how much it will cost, and what the risks are. Shirley obviously touched on the retail tariff plan. Eskom has recently fundamentally restructured tariffs. Its tariff structures, and that process will continue. There's also the broader market liberalization process, which has started with bilateral wheeling agreements. It's moving to a combination of bilateral wheeling and virtual wheeling. It will move into an initial sort of market phase where we won't necessarily have critical mass in the market, but we'll start to build that. And then finally, a place where we have a fully integrated multi-market. We are in the sort of middle to beginning of the process right now. And this is a great area. There's a lot of moving parts, and it's quite critical that work advances very clearly and quickly and as fast as possible, because market certainty is ultimately the bedrock of the economy and of economic growth in the country. Shirley, I think that your presentation obviously has a lot of great information. It also had the whole layer around NERSA and the regulations and curtailment, which I don't think time will allow me to go into too much, but I think probably a great point that Shirley made is that virtual wheeling is a great new opportunity. It's going to bring green energy to many more energy users, but it's certainly not a silver bullet yet. And there's quite a lot of complexity to work through there. Probably the question around traders being the counterparty to a virtual wheeling agreement is really a big area of uncertainty. Even throughout the presentation, it's obviously been raised. Even Eskom mentioned it themselves. Who are the entities that will be actually allowed to operate under this mechanism, and if you and end users who they'll be able to buy from, that will actually be able to deliver this energy to them. I think that's a big question mark, and it's even something that Eskom have raised. It's not currently clear who those entities will be and what the requirements will be of traders if they are counterparties to these virtual wheeling agreements. So I really just to kind of crystallize a little bit and touch on the developer view. So now this is, we sit at the side of, I'd like to say the coal face, but I mean, that's not exactly the right word. We're a green energy company, but we sit at the side, we're an infrastructure company. We build the assets and we sell the energy. I think, yeah, I mean, absolutely the opportunities for a bigger market are wonderful for us. In the context of an economy where demand is not necessarily growing that much in the country, and the economy is not necessarily growing that quickly, it's very important for us to be able to access a larger number of customers. It's good for those customers also to access cheaper energy, because that is a catalyst for greater economic growth as well. Virtual wheeling for us also offers an opportunity to potentially really shorten the sales cycle with buyers, make it simpler, make it easier for them to understand, and to remove a lot of complexity from their plates. A typical sales cycle on a conventional power purchase agreement could take anything from 6 to 12 months. Eskom have removed one of the big steps there, which is actually the amendment of electricity supply agreements, and that's a big benefit in terms of timing and also complexity for the end users. There's a diversification of the buyers and the end users, and that helps with the general risk associated with these projects. It does go in two directions, and some of we are diversifying to more buyers, but there are some limitations in terms of virtual wheeling, which I'll touch on now, which also potentially have a slightly negative impact on project finance and viability. And then it's an innovation catalyst. We are an IPP and a generator, but I think in the South African market, you have to be highly adaptable. In the energy sector, we've certainly had to pivot a number of times. And virtual wheeling presents a lot of new opportunities for organizations like ourselves, but also for other companies and industries, and some that haven't even been involved in the energy sector to develop new products. In terms of risks and areas to watch, we flagged the grid and good standing risk. I think it's probably important to note that from our perspective, what we see when we finance and build a project, the best thing we can have is a blend of longer and short-term contracts, and not just short-term contracts, because if your entire project is only selling short-term contracts, you are absorbing a high level of risk. And ultimately what happens is that risk gets priced in, and that will be priced into your project costs, because your finance costs will be higher. So there are, the structure of virtual wheeling does in many respects lend itself to shorter PPAs. The grid risk, I think, which we might not have touched on too much, is you potentially have a double layer of grid risk now as well, in terms of Eskom's load shedding or grid outages, as well as the LV network or municipal network outages as well. The long-term certainty is probably the most critical point here, and Shirley has spoken about all of the different processes that are happening in the background. For us, having certainty on that this platform will be there, or that if it's not there in exactly this format, that the principles will be carried through for a long time, is absolutely critical for businesses like ours and our funders to commit to building out capacity and having the certainty that these will be good investments. The more longevity we have on this platform, the greater efficiency we'll have, and the more competition we'll have in the market as well, and that will ultimately benefit the economy as a whole. I mentioned that we're diversifying the base, but in terms of new investment, the shorter terms could actually impact our ability to finance projects on the basis of virtual wheeling. So that's an important consideration. The ability to offer longer terms, which does tie into the grid and good standing risks, is important. From a buyer perspective, and from our buyer perspective, the question of value is very important as well. Virtual wheeling, what it does is it removes a lot of complexity from the end users, but what it also may do is, what's important to note is that the source of the energy that they are buying is very important. And we are still in a situation in the market where we don't have a liquid market at all. We have some initial green shoots in terms of wheeling projects that are able to offer power on a flexible basis, but the technology selection to give the highest value and flexibility is going to be extremely important. And there's going to need to be a lot of work, and certainly our focus is on battery storage to adapt and to deliver the most valuable and flexible sources of electricity. And again, the pricing is ultimately, there's lots of ways to mitigate risk, but pricing is ultimately very strongly linked to contract length. And I think, virtual wheeling as it stands might not necessarily offer buyers, and specifically in some of the municipal networks, the opportunity to buy energy on a 5-year or a 10-year or a 15 or a 20-year basis, where you can unlock very large savings and significant economic benefit on those types of contract lengths. And then again, the project complexity, I think understanding, certainly as putting myself in the shoes of some of our customers, the ability to understand, the timelines of when you will get this energy, if this energy through the virtual wheeling platform is coming from a viable project that actually is being built, what the contract terms are, and the tariffs. This is going to be extremely important. So I think maybe just to sum up, to put it into 3 key takeaways that we've seen. The first question is choice, and I mean, this is an amazing opportunity. It's bringing choice to a much larger group of Eskom and municipal energy users, and that's just that's obviously overwhelming positive shift for the industry. We're very excited to also bring energy to these businesses, and Solar has we've actually signed our first PPA built on the virtual wheeling platform as well. So we're very excited to start selling energy through the platform or through the mechanism. And the second point is probably complexity, and I think we've seen that come through in the discussions here. It's we're at the start of this process, but there's a high product diversity in the market. Lots of different suppliers are looking at different ways to provide their services. I think it's important that businesses will need to understand timings, costs, the terms of what they're buying, and the risks, and that might not be so clear. And then finally, the innovation and risk. There's a wide range of opportunities for innovation in data and risk management, system efficiency, product design. So it's a very exciting time for the country.
Well, thank you very much, Jonathan. I think your final slide speaks, volumes. Yeah, let's hope that the complexity of the whole arrangement is not something that the customer has to worry about. These are matters dealt with, behind the scenes by the platform and between generators and utilities. The municipalities, kind of don't have to worry too much about the details at all. They will continue to be paid in the normal way by the customer. They will issue their bills and get paid in the normal way. But this mechanism, this virtual wheeling mechanism, although it is a complex process, is not complex from the view ultimately of the customer. And that's really critical, and I think you've made some great points. Colleagues, we're now going to move into the Q&A phase of this webinar, and I'm going to ask all the presenters to please switch on your cameras and your microphones. I will direct various questions to you, and I just want to thank our presenters for handling so many of the questions already. We've had a total of 40 plus 13. That's about 53 questions, of which 40 have been handled in text form already, leaving about 13 or 14 still open to be answered. I'm not sure if we'll get through them all. I'm trying to sort of join a few questions together and put them to one or other of the presenters. If I can just ask the presenters to keep your responses as short as possible, there's no need to go into long, complex discussions. I'd rather keep it short and snappy so we can move through this. But my first question, and I'm not one to shy away from the elephants in the room, and so I want to confront it head on. I kind of saw as a kind of a bombshell announcement by Mutenda that this virtual wheeling arrangement is not open to traders yet. And this comes for me as a bit of a bombshell, because if virtual wheeling is not open to traders because of Eskom planning to challenge the license of traders, challenge nurses, award of licenses to trade. If this applies to virtual wheeling, the same logic would mean that you're not going to engage with traders in respect of conventional wheeling. And this is a bombshell for me, because it is putting the brakes on the country. And it doesn't make sense to me anyway. The point is, are you challenging the role of traders in general? And are you saying that these commercial opportunities are not yet open to traders? Yet, on the other hand, I receive press releases on a regular basis from traders, including Discovery Green and Power X and NOAA Group and all these licensed traders telling me about the projects that they are concluding. And yet, by the logic of what we've heard today, virtual wheeling is not available to traders. And by the same logic, how can other wheeling be available to traders? Where do traders stand today? So I would like to just pose the first question to Makenda and ask, has NERSA yet provided Eskom and the public with the reasons for decision, the record of decision in respect of traders? Has Eskom actually received this record of decision yet, and the reasons for decision? And has Eskom made a decision yet as to whether it is going to challenge the award of the trading licenses in court?
So, yeah, I think we all know the Eskom position on this point. And Eskom is not against any traders in the country at all. I mean, that is an issue for the ERA. The ERA allows for the traders in the country, in my own interpretation. But what Eskom is asking for, it's asking for a rule-based approach, So my own view, and not an Eskom view, this is a Motenda view, is we have looked at the European market, we have looked at the UK, and then what we find in the UK is that there's a rule-based approach. There are rules about traders. For example, there are rules that says, when is a customer able to switch from one trader to another trader? You do have those rules all over the planet, but I think we have been reckless in South Africa by not having such rules, So Eskom is not opposed to any traders at all, but Eskom is asking for a rule-based approach, In addition
can I just clarify my question? Has Eskom yet received the reasons for decision in respect of its award of licenses to a number of traders? As my first question. And number two, does Eskom intend to challenge these award of licenses to traders once it receives these record of decision or reasons for decision?
Yeah, I am not aware of any reasons for decisions. Maybe my colleagues in the legal department have, but I, for one, has not seen one. Maybe my colleagues in the legal department have. And then as far as the challenge in the trading space is concerned, what I have been informed by my colleagues is that there's engagements with NERSA in that space, and then depending on how those engagements unfold, then a decision will be made on how to proceed. Yeah, but the key thing is there must be a rule-based approach on a number of activities, and there has been recklessness in our in my Motenda view, in South Africa, we don't have rules, and we know from the UK there's rules. When you want to change from one trader to another trader, there's rules. We don't have that in South Africa. There's switching rules, there's issues around metering. I can give you...
Then let's move on, because time is very short. And if I may move on to you, Andre, and I know you probably don't want to answer this question, but I'm going to put it to you, and I'm going to put you on a spot anyway. I mean, I get press releases from Discovery Green, and not just Discovery Green, but from a whole range of traders, proudly telling us about the deals that they have concluded. And some of these involve, for example, your new arrangement with Sasol, and arrangements with clients, small and micro, small and medium-sized enterprises embedded in municipal networks. And here we hear that this is not available to traders, yet traders are concluding deals, apparently. Where do things stand from your point of view as a trader?
Yeah, you are putting us on the spot, but it's perfectly fine. Thanks, Chris. So I think it's I mean the bit of a surprise. Of course, what came out today, we did not understand that to be the case, but be that as it may, I think we now if the rules is what is missing, I think the answer is let's go and get these rules done as quick as possible. If that is the concern, from understand his you need a rules-based system. Let's do it. Let's go do it, and get it done, so that it's absolutely fair for everyone. I think that's what we want to achieve. I think that's our position.
Can we, in the meantime, put aside all these press releases, positive press releases that I receive regularly from traders, to say, hang on, these deals are not done yet. This virtual wheeling is actually, and for that matter, I mean, by the same logic of virtual wheeling not being available to traders, if these the same traders, is conventional wheeling available, to traders, and it just seems to me like we have this whole thing that's all happening, a lot of excitement, a lot of positive, messaging coming out, but it seems to me that there's an elephant in this room. I mean, where do things stand with regard to all these announcements, both conventional wheeling through traders as well as virtual wheeling through traders?
I think, one conventional wheeling, we're not blocked on that front.
But why not? Because the logic would indicate that you would have to. If you're doing it with one, you must do it with the other.
I take your point, Chris, but maybe the answer is, what is the alternative, really, to this? We can't. We're not going to sit and I don't think it's fair to sit in sidelines and wait on this. We've got to get going on that. There's the ERA. There's law around how this should play out, and we'll continue on that, and we'll just continue with the narrative to try and find a way. If this rules element is now the problem, let's go and get that done so that everyone is happy, and
yeah,
that's our view.
Okay, look, let's move on from this issue. I think we've heard what Mutenda has to say. We've heard what you've had to say. For me, it is, comes as something of a shock today. But I'd like to maybe now move on to a question to Jacques. And to just, you've explained the criticality of metering and metering data in this whole process. And I just want to try and understand this. For customers embedded in a municipal network that is in good standing, for example, is it the case that that customer must be on a time of use tariff with its municipality? In other words, does it have to change its tariff if it is not on a time of use tariff? Number one. And number two, does a customer have to put in a second time of use meter, or a time of use meter that is not owned by the municipality, to which the trader or the generator or Eskom have access to? So let's just say there's an existing meter which belongs to the municipality, that doesn't provide access to hourly or half-hourly data, does a second meter in parallel, owned by some other party, have to be put in place in parallel with the existing meter or not? Those are my questions, Jacques.
Thanks, Chris. So I think one of the big, it was mentioned briefly by Shirley. Shirley, it's great to see you again. One of the big wins of this mechanism is that Munich offtake is business as usual. So irrespective, the ESA between Eskom and the municipality and between the tenant in the municipality and the Munich remains business as usual. So if it's a blended rate that they pay, continue to pay your monthly utility bill. The claim is a time of use claim to Eskom. And it's got nothing to do with the Munich rate or tariff rate or structure. So that's answering your first question.
Yes, yes.
The one around the metering is that the only requirement is that it meets the Eskom certification requirement. So it's on the list of Eskom certified meters. There's OEMs, multiple OEMs down to the model of the actual meter, SAT 474. If you as a buyer are comfortable that the current meter, let's call it the legacy meter, does fulfill and check all the boxes, then that data is sufficient for the purpose of claiming a refund. But it's important to note Eskom, as per the contract that they sign with the agreement, can do audits, on-site physical audits. And should they find that the meter that's being used to report time of use data does not meet their requirements, then they're contractually not obliged to pay that portion of the offtake or the refund. So the onus is on the buyer to make sure the metering data is representative. In order to ensure a scenario of an on-site audit that you don't pass and you miss out on that portion of your offtake.
Yeah.
So I think.
Thank you. I think that's clear. Yeah. Thank you.
In Salga, if you extrapolate this principle, Munichs can also be buyers. If they would like to on-sell a green credential on the utility bill to their tenant. So I think the mechanism is, and I don't want this trader question, elephant in the room, it's got nothing to do with virtual wheeling. Once the business rules are settled, my understanding is traders will be able to use the mechanism similar to our buyer's contracting mechanism. So let's not confuse matters with respect to who's eligible to contract. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jacques. I think, that's clarified it in my mind, certainly. Look, I'd like to put this one to Shirley, if I may, although it does involve Jacques as well. So, Jacques, feel free to come in as well. This virtual wheeling platform that has been developed, as I understand, but by Mezzanine in conjunction with Eskom, if I'm right in that understanding, is this virtual wheeling platform that Mezzanine has developed? Is this a platform only available for Vodacom and its 15,000 sites in its portfolio, or is this platform that has been developed by Mezzanine with Eskom available? I mean, is it an Eskom platform that is available to all customers, not just Vodacom? So that's my question to Shirley, and Jacques, feel free to chip in as well. Shirley? Your microphone, Shirley.
I think ideally Jacques should answer that one. But my understanding when I was at Eskom is that the individuals could develop their own platforms, but then they need to then talk to an Eskom platform based on a certain protocol. So I don't think the intention ever was that it would be proprietary only to one platform provider. But Jacques can add. Thanks.
Jacques, please.
Thanks, Shirley. So I did reference this in the presentation, but developing the mechanism and co-creating the mechanism was a social compact and a social contribution from Vodacom and from Mezzanine side with respect to the effort and the IP. So the mechanism is an Eskom mechanism. That's very important to appreciate. It's in Mutenda, if a buyer contract on Eskom paper, the Mezzanine platform was developed in order to enable the buyer to meet the contractual obligations as per the virtual wheeling agreement signed between the buyer and Eskom. Non-exclusive, very important. We actually made the IP public to say we encourage third parties to do something similar because it will never be a good thing for one provider to offer a service. So the IP with respect to how it works, the requirements, everything we've presented, we can share the blueprint. And there's no contractual obligation from an Eskom point of view that the buyer must use a platform. The requirement is simple. You must submit your time of use data, 6 readings, non-local, end of month. If you do it in Excel, that ticks the box contractually. It's with respect to the 30-minute resolution and keeping data for 5 years for audit purposes. So it's reading the small print where the complexities of the data, managing data, processing data becomes important in order to mitigate contractual risks. So important, Mezzanine does offer a platform capability that's used by Vodacom. It's available commercially for third parties to also use, but it's non-exclusive. And contractually, there's nothing that ties to use the Mezzanine platform from a Eskom.
I think that answers my question fully. I was going to say, is this a platform that is a commercial product that is available to other users? And the answer you've given is clear. Yes, at the moment, the platform is with Vodacom. They are a user of your platform, but the same product or product along these lines is available commercially. And it's not exclusive. There are other people that can develop their own platforms the way you have developed a platform that provides the correct information to Eskom in the correct format and the correct using the right protocol. So I think I've got the picture. Thank you very much. I want to touch on the other elephant in the room, you might say, and that is the this business about municipalities that are not in good standing. And I want to put this to, well, let's just say, let's go to Mutenda, if we may, and say, Mutenda, if you can speak hard into the microphone, please. Mutenda, a year ago, or more than a year ago, Meridian Economics presented a concept of token wheeling as a mechanism that could be applied with further development work, no doubt, and further work with Eskom and with developers like Jacques or others. The concept of token wheeling, which would overcome this shortcoming. Well, let us say not a shortcoming, but would overcome the barrier to entry of customers who are embedded in municipalities that are not in good standing with Eskom. So my question is, what is Eskom's level of support for the concept of token wheeling, and has any work been progressed by Eskom or others that you may know of, to develop this token wheeling aspect further, which, to my mind, is a critical potential solution to making virtual wheeling available on a much broader scale. We've looked. Jacques has explained that half of his towers, or half of Vodacom's towers, cannot use this mechanism. They cannot achieve their green objectives or the decarbonisation objectives. So I would think that this virtual wheeling concept, that it's a matter of urgency that it be taken forward. And so my question is Eskom taking this forward in any way? What does it think of the proposal? And are they aware of anybody else taking it forward?
Yeah, sure. So we did meet with Meridian. And then we did tell them that we definitely support the proposal that they're putting on the table. there has not been any material advancement on the issue. Yeah, but we did meet with them at the executive level, and then we stated to them that we support what you are proposing and we understand what you are proposing. Yeah, but there's not been any material advancement. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks very much, Mutenda. Look, time is actually run out at the moment. And I'm going to have to call it a day, but I see there is one hand up. So can we make this the last question? We have answered in the text form something like, let me just see, about 50 questions have been answered already in text form, and I'd like to go to Hendrik Barnard and ask Henry, and actually I'm just enabling you to talk, Hendrik. I hope. Are you able to ask your question, Hendrik? Hey, hang on a minute, Hendrik. I'm trying to allow you to talk, Hendrik. Just hang on a second. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you try and ask your question, Henry? That's it. Got it. Thank you.
Okay. So, firstly, related to the issue, the municipalities and the bad standing. I mean, what would happen if there is a wheeling agreement is effectively there will be a discount on the Eskom bill. So that, in fact, would reduce the risk of Eskom because the amount of invoicing going to that municipality would reduce. So I can't see why they use this as a criteria because, in fact, the energy will now come from a generator and thus their risk will be reduced. So, in fact, it's actually got nothing to do with the fact that they have an outstanding account because they don't need to make any payment to Eskom in terms of this agreement. So it doesn't make sense for me.
Can I put this one to Shirley? Shirley, if you'd like to come in here. I know Mutenda might also like to come in, but you've been involved in this from the beginning, Shirley, and you might have a view. Is this requirement to be in good standing for a municipality to be in good standing with Eskom, is it relevant or is it irrelevant, as Hendrik has pointed out?
Look, I can't talk on behalf of Eskom, but what I can say is that there was a lot of work done under NECOM to look at how to mitigate this as a potential issue. And the comment that Hendrik is making, Frank Hinder also, I see, made a point as well, is that it does reduce Eskom's risk. I think Eskom's argument is that, but we're not getting paid for the wheeling charges. So we're providing a wheeling service, but we're not getting paid. Mutenda also mentioned that Eskom has come up with a new concept where if the IPP pays the portion of the wheeling charge that the municipality would be liable for, then Eskom would allow municipalities that are not in good standing. But it is an Eskom product. So this is an innovative thing that Eskom is looking at to sort of mitigate some of the issues. And then there is also work being done on the NECOM side. And
is there any
one of the options is obviously looking at this token mechanism. Yeah.
Okay, that was what I was going to ask you, is that is NECOM looking at this token wheeling idea? And it seems to me that they may be. Maybe you can just clarify again.
No, I think there's just a number of options that have been looked at from on how to deal with this. Are there financial mechanisms? Could you do contract for differences, for example? Just nothing concrete, but obviously looking to assist both Eskom and also customers within wheeling within municipalities. The big concern has always been if you allow wheeling for free, you know, that's not a good business proposition. Thanks.
Mutenda, do you have anything further to add that you would like to add in respect of Hendrik Barnard's comments?
Yeah, thank you. So this is phase 1 of the wheeling product, virtual wheeling product. Eskom through NICOM is working with the Green Cape to look at the phase 2 issues and then to expand the scope, you know. So I think maybe in that phase 2 issues, this is where the tokens and this new option by Eskom, which we call GX Build, where the IPP pays for all these wheeling charges, and then it will enable wheeling to happen in a scenario where the municipality isn't dead, you know. Yeah. So phase and work is being done with the Green Cape. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mutenda. We're going to have to draw things to a close, ladies and gentlemen. It's 5 minutes past the deadline of 12:30, where this is supposed to end. So we're at 5 minutes over time. I have just received a WhatsApp message on my phone to tell me that the token wheeling initiative is now gaining traction, and that stakeholders should expect to see some developments announced in the second half of this year. So I think that is an interesting announcement. So watch this space, and I'm sure this opens the door to further, webinars that we can share this information on these new developments. As you've said, Mutenda, phase 2 has got to start dealing, with some of the issues that are preventing the rollout of virtual wheeling, and one of them is this municipal, being in good standing issue, which can be resolved, I believe, by some of the proposals that you've mentioned, the GX initiative, as well as the token wheeling initiative. And of course, phase 2, I hope, will also deal with the question of how traders can be involved in virtual wheeling, which is something that needs to be resolved, in my view, as a matter of great urgency. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a very interesting webinar. It has discussed some very contentious issues. We should not shy away from discussing contentious issues. We should address them honestly, and I believe that that's exactly what has happened today. Our presenters have really given their views honestly and fairly, and I think it opens the door to more discussions in the future, more webinars such as this, in order to explore the solutions that I know exist to what seems to be problems, but they really are challenges that can be dealt with. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance. Thank you for those companies that have supported this initiative. And I want to just mention them by name: Eskom Distribution, Discovery Green, Mezzanine, Cresco, and Solar Group. Thank you for your support for this webinar. Thank you for allowing your presenters to present today, and thank you to the presenters for putting in all the work that they have done with their presentations. Thank you also to the audience for attending. It's been a great audience, a lot of questions and a lot of issues arising. And watch this space for our next webinars, which will be coming up within the next month. And we look forward to seeing you again. All the best.